Today on Life Mosaic, I'm honored to welcome Terry C Plumb, whose career in newspapers has spanned nearly 4 decades. Terry's passion for storytelling, his commitment to truth, and his deep understanding of what binds a community together have left a mark on every place he's called home. Whether he's transforming a small island newspaper into a daily must read or advocating for the next generation of truth seekers. Terry's story is one of resilience, empathy, and unwavering dedication. Terry, thank you for joining me on Life Mosaic. Welcome to Life Mosaic. Hi, I'm Weezy, and I love to share stories that connect the generations, weaving together the threads of life into a beautiful and lasting legacy. This is a space where every moment and memory matters, embracing the joy, the challenges, and everything in between that shapes who we are. Join me as I uncover and celebrate the living legacy that transcends time and space, creating the mosaic of life, one story at a time. So, Terry, I am so glad that you are here, that you have said that yes, you said yes to being a guest on Life Mosaic here with me. I think you're an interesting guy, and just thank you, Terry, for being here today.
I'm flattered to be asked.
So, Terry, reading the information that you shared with me, you've had a pretty impactful career. Do you remember the moment you first fell in love with journalism?
Well, not really. My father was a newspaper man pretty much all his life, and that probably had a lot to do with it because I kind of admired what the stature that he got from it and the
Mm-hmm.
recognition. But I had not seriously considered newspapers. I was a junior in college at the University of Notre Dame and struggling to figure out what the heck I wanted to major in. And I read in the student publication that the foundation had given a lot of money to this department called Communication Arts, I'd never heard of. And I thought, boy, I could use some of that money. So I went and made an appointment with the dean. His name was Tom Stritch. He was a nephew of Cardinal Stritch, one of the powerful figures in the Catholic Church at that time. And I said, Dean Stritch, I'd like to get some of that money. And he laughed. He said, well, yeah, that's not the way foundations work. That money goes into an account, and it's the interest that's accrued over time um, that provide scholarships. But tell me about yourself. And I told him, about myself. And he provided if I would change or sign up for that department major, I'd get a scholarship. And it wasn't a lot of money, but back then college scholarships were college was a lot cheaper. And so I took a class. It was kind of like a journalism 101. Notre Dame had a journalism department years before, but it died off. I'm not sure exactly why. Red Smith, who was one of the most famous sports writers in American history, had gone to Notre Dame. But I still had not considered journalism. But he thought I had talent as a writer, and I guess he liked the style of writing. So happens that not long after that semester started, my father died, and during the class, he told, after class one time he said, "Well, why don't you get a job as a newspaper intern for the summer?" And I said, "Well, why would I do that?" And he said, "Well, you might like it, and better yet, you might not like it. And if you don't like it, then you can cross that off possibilities." And so I went in to see this crusty old managing editor of the Tampa Tribune named Virgil Red Newton, who had been around for many, many years and a real fire eater, I think, in his early years. This is not long before he retired. And I said, "Mr. Newton, I'd like a job." And he said, "I don't hire no goddamn college kids." He hired me. He gave me a job, I guess probably because my father's had worked there for decades. And fortunate for me, they didn't really have a structured program. They just sort of threw me into things.
Okay.
That first summer, I was asked to fill in for the real estate editor doing their Sunday real estate section. I'd laid out a one page in class. I'd never really done any layout or editing, and found out that the real estate editor not only was going on summer vacation, he had no section done in advance. So I had to, in about 3 days, produce a newspaper section. and never having done that. And of course, I had to ask the help of a lot of people, and they all were very
Learning
gracious
by
and
the
helped me.
course of fire, huh?
Yeah. So by the end of the summer, I'd done this and that, and I was reasonably good at it and got good feedback. And I never really looked at any other career seriously. And I worked there for 2 summers. I got a nice fellowship to go to graduate school at University of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and I was miserable. I was not cut out to be a scholar, and didn't program wasn't what I wanted. And I was going to quit the first semester. The dean said, "Well, if you leave, we lose this scholarship money." It was about $2,000, which was pretty handsome back then. I could live
Mm,
a whole semester on that pretty much. So I stayed to the second semester, and I just hated it. And so it was during the height of the Vietnam War, and I knew that once I dropped out of graduate school, I was going to get drafted.
yeah.
I had learned the Army had what they call a delayed enlistment program, deferred enlistment, where if you enlisted, you could come into the Army anytime in the next 6 months. They didn't draft you right away. So I signed up for that, and I got 6 months of freedom, and I got another job at the Tampa Tribune. So I had worked for almost a year in journalism before I had to go in the Army. And the best part of it was during that last summer at the Tampa Tribune, met the managing editor secretary, who's now my wife, 57, almost 60 years later.
Ah, okay.
So that's how I got into it. And then when I got back from Vietnam, my wife had her old job back. They'd hired her back, and we had good friends there, and so it was easy for me to slide back into the Tampa Tribune. Um, and I worked there for about 3 years before I moved on to my next job in Clearwater, Florida, which was really about 20 miles away, and that actually was my birthplace, and it was where my father had been born, from a pioneer Florida family, and he had his job at the Clearwater Sun. I think it was his first job. So I was following my father's footsteps without ever intending to do that.
Oh,
And then I moved by the time I left the Clearwater Sun, I was the editor, and I jumped ship to go to Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, where I became the editor of a weekly, or twice a week, 3 times a week, a twice a week paper called the Island Packet, and was there for about 9 to 10 years. And in the meantime, we'd taken that from a twice a week to a 3 times a week to a daily paper, and was then transferred to Rock Hill, where I finished out my career 20 years later. It was the same company at the time, so it was a promotion within the company, and I've been with that company pretty much ever since. Now it became the company was bought out. It was the News and Observer Company in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was bought out by McClatchy Newspapers, and that's who owned it when I retired.
okay. So I've got kind of a fun little question for you.
Sure.
Uh, if if you had to describe your career in journalism as a headline, what would it read?
Oh, community news editor retires without ever having been killed by an irate reader. There were many that would have loved to have done that, I think. I
Ah,
actually one time found out that there'd been a contract put out on me. I had left Clearwater and was in Hilton Head Island, and I got a phone call. The operator said there's a Frank Daniels on the phone. Well, Frank Daniels was the name of the publisher of the News and Observer Company, which owned the Island Packet. And I assumed it was him. Well, it turns out that I knew another Frank Daniels, who was the chief of police in Clearwater, Florida. And so it was a little bit of confusion on my part and he was a friend of mine. And so I figured out who it was. And, hey, Chief, what's happening? He said, well, I don't want to scare you, but there's been a contract put out on you. And I said, what? And apparently, what had happened was before I'd left, we had this very talented reporter who would do restaurant reviews for us. It wasn't her primary job, but she was very good at it. She was very, very responsible. And there was a couple of brothers, I think they were Hungarians, who owned a restaurant in Clearwater, which was kind of a greasy spoon, but they managed to somehow land a very posh new restaurant out on Sand Key, which was a very expensive part of the town. And she went to it and it was terrible. And she went back again, I think. It was still terrible. It was she and her husband and two other people, and they all had bad experience. And she wrote about it. And they went ballistic and they harassed her. And I'd forgotten all about it because it's some time in the past. And apparently they had a contract put out of me to somebody to break my legs.
Oh,
And the chief said, "Well, don't worry about it. They think you went to North Carolina, not South Carolina." I thought, "Oh my God!" But nothing ever happened.
they never found you.
They may still be looking for all I know.
Oh, that's funny. Now that makes quite the headlines. So you have been through, if you were in the newspaper business for 45 years, you've
40, almost 40, not quite 40.
where did I get 45? I got 45 from somewhere.
I'm just
Probably
a I'm just a
some
kid, you realize.
okay. But you were in the newspaper business for over 4 decades.
Right.
And you, as so many people of this generation, we've seen a lot of changes. Um, what are some of, when did you get an idea that things were going to change from the daily paper to what started to
What we have
progress?
now.
Yeah.
Well, McClatchy was considered like one of the very best chains newspaper companies in the country. And they had a long history. They started in Sacramento, California. High standards of journalism. Had not been a big company that long. And not long before I retired, they became a much bigger company because they bought out Knight Ridder, which was like one of the two largest newspaper companies in America. And it made McClatchy the biggest. It was either McClatchy or Gannett. There was one number which was the total circulation of all the subscribers, and the other one was the number of newspapers. And I think McClatchy was number one in one of those categories and two in the other, and vice versa. Gannett was one and two. So it was really a big company. But they had been fairly heavily involved in the internet communications journalism for a while, and they prided themselves on staying ahead of the curve, and everybody in the industry knew that change was coming, that more and more people, especially younger people, were going to the digital news rather than the print. And while newspaper circulation in the United States peaked in 1963, or maybe
Oh,
it was
wow.
83, maybe it was 83. Anyway, even though it had been going up for a long time, as a percentage of the population, fewer and fewer people were subscribing to daily newspapers. And it probably started back in the radio days, but it certainly was aggravated by television. In other words, the newspapers are continuing to grow, but the population was growing faster. And
Right.
people who really knew the industry understood that. But there was a belief among a lot of people, including very bright people, that we will get that digital business, that we will be so good that people will want to go to our digital paper and not somebody else's. And McClatchy was very careful that when they bought a paper, it was in a growth market, which meant more population and higher income people. So that's what advertisers wanted. Newspaper ad rates were based on the number of subscribers you had. So you needed to grow that base. And what even the smart ones that never really figured out was once the number of people who were getting their internet via broadband, once it hit a critical level, the digital competitors for advertising would basically take away the newspaper's base. And it started first with classified advertising. And classified advertising was car ads, it was real estate ads, help wanted ads. And while that was a less than, it was about 40% of a newspaper's advertising revenue. And when Craigslist and other competitors started offering free ads to people, people stopped reading the papers for those ads, and all that revenue went out the door.
Ooh.
So newspapers lost almost half their advertising revenue almost overnight. And most of them did not know how to recover from that because when they started charging people to read the online version, what we call paywalls, where people had to be a paid subscriber to get the news. Not many people did that. They preferred to do without local news and go to national news sources, especially the internet, is where we are today.
Yeah.
Thousands of newspapers have gone out of business. Most of them are weeklies, but I can get into that. Well, that sounds trivial that people don't read a weekly newspaper.
If they're not reading, if everything's more national, how does that impact the everyday community?
Well, that's exactly what bothers me. And it um people do not know what's going on in their community. They don't know what their government's doing, and they don't really know what businesses are doing. They don't know what their neighbors are talking about. And my theory about newspapers was, despite what we as journalists prided ourselves on, which was winning Pulitzer Prize, winning State Press Association. Not that I ever won a Pulitzer Prize, but I mean, we like those big recognition from within the
Mm-hmm.
industry. That's how
Right.
most reporters judge themselves. But that's not what newspapers, readers, subscribers bought the paper for. They
No.
bought it for everything. They bought it for Ann Landers. They bought it for high school sports. They bought it for grocery ads. They bought it for the honor rolls, for their see the kid's name in print. They bought it for the weddings, the obituaries. And over time, newspapers were sort of a catch-all for what was going on in the community. And it didn't really make any difference, certainly to the advertising department, why people bought a paper. As long as they bought the paper, we could get the ad revenue. But what you had was in a community with a good community paper, a majority of families, maybe somewhere upwards of 60% of the families, bought that paper and read it
Yeah.
at least once a week. And so, because of that, you had a kind of a town square where everybody came, and they may not read every story, but they had the potential of being exposed to every story. So that
Yeah,
maybe
I mean, like you may not hit every article, but you still like, just I remember growing up and getting the daily paper, and our daily paper was exactly like what you were saying, and
right,
you may not read all of the article, but you definitely read the
you scan the
highlights.
headline.
Yeah, so you had kind of a idea of what was going on, and it's like, I might come back to that later, but you had an idea of what was going on around town.
Well, you had a common bond with people
Yeah,
who
and it gave you something to talk about.
these people may not look like you. They may be a different race, different gender, different sexual preference, different. Yeah, and but that bound you together in a very loose, non-threatening way. And
Mm-hmm.
people that would make fun of the paper, but they read the paper. And I
Yeah, because
remember
I
time
mean, so many times you start a conversation. Did you see in the paper?
exactly. And you didn't want to admit that no, you didn't see it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, when I was on Hilton Head Island, as I said, it was started twice a week, and we delivered it by mail. So we would print that paper on Monday and Wednesday, and it would be mailed to people so they would receive it on Tuesday and Thursday. And we covered the community because it was basically an island. We knew when we hit water, we'd reach the edge of our area of interest. And so we covered everything. If you got a parking ticket, your name went in the paper.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah, everything. And we ran the emergency fire calls, the rescue squads. We had a call. It was called snake rescue, which meant if the water moccasin
Oh,
ended up in your fireplace, the fire department would come out and get it out, and we we had that in there. And then and what happened was people were so intent on reading the Allen packet, they wouldn't wait for the one to come in the mail. They would go out the night before and buy it in the news rack.
oh,
We
geez.
put it out in news racks on the night before, the day before. And then we had a deal where you could get an annual subscription. Again, this comes to the mail for $12 a year. So smart real estate agents would give a gift subscription to people they were trying to sell real estate to or had sold real estate to and hope to sell them another piece. So we had more than 100% penetration, which means we were selling more newspaper than there were houses on the island. Now that was unheard of. Because of the special circumstances in Hilton Head, you wouldn't find them many other places. But basically, it allowed us to have cover things that most papers would never be able to cover. I had a small paper, but I had a big staff, and we covered everything. And it was it kind of spoiled me for journalism because that's always been something I would hope to accomplish at the Herald in Rock Hill. Of course, we couldn't, even though I had a large staff, we couldn't cover things to that degree. But it sort of set my ideal for what a newspaper ought to be doing, and that's done almost nowhere anymore.
No. Do you think there's any way to repair that damage?
I think over time, and there are things that are going on that people are trying. More often than not, it has to be a nonprofit operation. You can't rely on government, and I think we're seeing today why you don't want government to own the newspaper or be funding a newspaper. But if you, because with the internet newspaper, you're freed of two major, well, one major expense. You don't have to pay for the paper. You don't have to pay for the ink. You don't have to pay for somebody to deliver the product. Once you get the information, which is expensive if you're paying for people to do it, once you get that information and you write it and you edit it and put it in the right format, send it out. There's no cost involved. Of course, as anybody with a computer and access to the internet can put out anything they want to. Getting the information and getting it in a credible, well written, well presented format is where the work is. But I think you could serve a community with a very small number of paid professionals and rely very heavily on volunteers. Like this town has a lot of very talented people who've come here from all over the country who are well educated, who can write, who had professional backgrounds. And I think it would be fairly easy to recruit people to be volunteer reporters. You would train them. And I mean, journalism is not brain science. It's not, you give me a reasonably well educated person who's curious about what's going on in their community. And I know a lot of the people, you could train them to be a city hall reporter or a county council reporter. And but the way I would do it was I would have a team. There might be three or four people responsible for covering Rock Hill City Hall. And they could work it out among themselves who goes to the next meeting. And you teach them how to write a story for the format that you're working with. And then you do the same thing with arts and culture, business, and you could have a couple of dozen people who could be out there reporting the news as long as you had somebody who was a professional and knew how to put it all together. And you might have to pay a couple of people to do that. You certainly would have to have some money to pay for libel insurance. You wouldn't dare try to do something like that without libel insurance. That's going to be $10,000 a year right there. But the Post and Courier, which is the last big family owned newspaper in the state of South Carolina, is doing a really good job of putting out regional editions, digital. They have resources in that they have about 10 print newspapers in the state. So they have people reporting this news anyway. And they're really good at sharing this information. And they have opened these digital newsrooms all over the state. And they just opened one in Rock Hill within the last month. Excuse me. Now, the point is that they are making it work to the extent that it's making a profit. Not the one in Rock Hill yet, but there are other ones. They're making some money. In doing that in itself is quite an accomplishment because most print publications have either gone bankrupt or about to go bankrupt.
Yeah. So how are they making
Well,
profit by selling subscriptions?
they're getting subscription money, which is about 60% of the revenue. Used to be advertising was 85% of a newspaper's revenue. They're making it with 40%. So 60% is coming from subscribers, but they're building slowly.
Mm-hmm.
So they have some unique resources that allows them to do this statewide. But you could do something very similar. There's a couple of guys up in TKK have a paper called the TKK Sun, and they just won a bunch of awards in the state press association annual contest. I wouldn't. I probably would do something differently, but for only having two guys putting it together, it's a pretty neat little operation. They're still relying on getting a lot of stories from other sources that are, you know,
Yeah.
not really TKK, but it's possible to put out something like that if you have the right kind of leadership and you've got some money to start to get it started. I think you could make it. Now in York County, if I were to do something like that, I would focus just on Rock Hill. I would not try to be countywide because people don't really identify. Nobody says I'm from York County. I'm from Rock Hill. I'm from Fort Mill. I'm from TKK. I'm from River Hills. Some of it are not
Yeah.
municipalities, but I think that interest is where you build your reader subscriber loyalty. Things that people find interesting. My rule of thumb when I was working was if people are interested in it, they ought to be able to find it in the Herald. And your goal is to try and find out what people are interested in, which means you got to have people who are running the show who know what people are talking about in the community, who are in the community.
Yeah. So is there something I have a question regarding that? Oh, is there something today's content creators or as you were kind of saying citizen journalists, is there something that they could learn from this newspaper culture?
Is there something they could learn from the culture? Well,
The culture you were part of.
well, I think that was tried and true. I mean, what I did and what the journalists of my era did, as best I understand it, was exactly pretty much what people have been doing for over 100 years. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have national newspapers in this country much because the country was so spread out. Unlike England, we had far more newspapers than Great Britain had, and they had national papers. But America was so vast,
Fast. Yeah.
and people settled new areas. They wanted their own paper for to get ads and let people know, what was going on. And so it wasn't until the Civil War when the telegraph came along where people could get close to real time coverage of stories from across the country. But they still were local papers. And when they started, AP started, people were able to get national stories put in their paper. They were still in the local package. And that's what people of my generation and for generations before that had done. They covered City Hall, they covered the county government, they covered the state legislature. Now, big papers could cover the legislature themselves with one or two reporters, but smaller papers had to rely on the Associated Press or the UPI, which was a big AP competitor for many years. So they in effect, pool their resources to pay for these services that they could not get. Well, we kind of have that in a way, but what we're getting from the national media, I'm being very broad when I call them news media, there's not a whole lot of factual information in it compared to the amount of volume. Because
No, it it's become an opinion piece,
opinion,
or
see, opinion's cheap.
few.
You can get six old men sitting on a table talking about what they think they about the news. But
Right.
what I like to use the image of a triangle. The way the news media worked was at the bottom, the very bottom, you had the small weekly papers, and then you come up a little bit higher and you have small dailies and all the way up. And because of the way news media was structured, most of those daily papers and a lot of the weekly papers were members of Associated Press or similar services. And so, as part of your responsibility, your contract with AP, you had to share stories with them if they wanted stories. So every day at certain times in Rock Hill, the Herald, we would notify Associated Press what we had. And they'd tell us, okay, we want this story, that story, with this photograph, whatever. And then you went up from Columbia, South Carolina to Atlanta, Georgia, from Atlanta, Georgia to New York City, whatever. And all this information from all over the country is flowing up. Like a weekly paper might not be Associated Press, but they busted the story about the sheriff got caught stealing last week. The local daily is going to pick up on that story. They're going to follow up on it. The same thing with AP. They would take your story and they would improve upon it if it was a big enough story. So you have this massive pyramid, and you get all the way to the top to New York or Washington, D.C. or whatever, it's pinnacle. What's happened with the death of newspapers is all like over 2,000 weeklies went out of business in a very short period of time. So all that bottom has collapsed, and you don't have those tens of thousands of people out there looking for stories. Like at the Herald, we had at our max about 46 people in the newsroom. Now, they weren't all reporters, but they were in the news department. That doesn't begin to talk about where we got our information from because we had another 100 people or more who worked at the Herald, and they lived all over York County and Chester County and Lancaster County. And they all had children in schools. They worshiped at churches. They drove back and forth. So they'd see things.
Yeah.
They'd see a police tape around a 7-Eleven out on Highway 55 or something. They would tell us about it. They called us, what's going on there? So we knew, our reporters knew to go look to see that stuff. So it wasn't just our news reporters that were helping accumulate the information and pass it on up. It was a lot of people. And so what we have now is just the opposite. We have the pyramid been topped on its head. You have a story, wherever it comes from, and then it's being passed up the line. But because people aren't doing their primary reporting anymore, they're just embroidering on it. They're putting their opinion on it. So all of a sudden, you have the pyramid's got a very, very narrow base on it. And so you're not getting the myriad of information, the different kinds of information you used to get. You're getting very almost select, very narrow focus. Two reasons for that. One, the big reason is that the way newspapers are rewarded by these national ads, the pop-up ads you see on digital paper, the number of times people click on that is what amounts to produces revenue. And it takes a lot of clicks to get a little bit of money because most of the money that's spent on advertising today goes to the internet providers. It does not go to news media that collects the information. So what are you going to get more clicks on? It's going to be crime news, bad news, accidents, crises, catastrophes, or whatever. That's going
Yeah.
to get attention. And people ask me, how do I get the story in the Herald today? And I said, it's real simple. All you got to do is sodomize a goat on the front steps of City
Oh,
Hall, and you'll get front page coverage.
yeah.
Uh, so that is a big factor in not only do we have few original original reporting out there, what they're covering, what they're actually prizing in terms of coverage is very narrow type news. Plus now, used to be we had reporters and we had photographers. Now everybody is an online content provider. So the reporters having to cover more territory because there are fewer people working, much fewer people. And then they're also having to take pictures, provide video, have people do stand up interviews, and put all that online right away.
Yeah.
So there's less time spent doing background research, and you're putting that content up immediately without an editor necessarily having his or her hands on it. And I mean, I never felt comfortable reporting stuff where my news, what I was writing, went directly in the newspaper without somebody else reading it, because you just can't spot your own mistakes the way that a pro disinterested copy editor can spot your mistakes.
Yes.
It's a bad combination of factors.
Yeah. Oh. So that is on your things about the newspapers and how it's changed to today. We're going to shift gears here just a little bit
Okay.
because you have another passion that you're working with. But before we do that, let's take a break to hear a word from our sponsor at Weezy Media Productions. This is your story, and Weezy Media Productions is here to help you tell it with clarity, heart, and confidence. Whether you're building a legacy, growing your business, or just ready to show up on video, you don't have to figure it all out alone. I'm Weezy, your guide to guided storytelling. From coaching to camera, I'll help you plan it, prep it, and share it in a way that truly connects. Ready to step into your story? Visit WeezyInc.com. That's WeezyInc.com to get started today because the story lives on if it's told. Um, you have, you've spent your career championing the information to the communities. How did joining the library board feel like? Did that feel like a natural next step? Because now you're on the library board and trying to make some help
First,
there.
I have to be clear that while I recently went on the board of the trustees for York County Library, I can't speak for that organization. Uh,
Correct.
Prior to that, however, I was with the Friends of the Library, which is an independent group, nonprofit group, and we basically raised because I'm not no longer a board member of that, but they raise money for the library. They do so primarily by selling books. Used books were donated to the library,
Uh
um,
huh.
and they do quite well at it. And they then give that money back to the library for things the library couldn't afford otherwise. And I have always been a patron of the library, but I must admit I wasn't one of the heaviest patrons. In my newspaper career, when I was doing research on something that had to delve into history, especially
Mm hmm.
Rock Hill history, the things that were different from or maybe in more depth than what the paper had, because I could always go into our own files. The library was where I went. And so I used the library a lot when I was in high school and college, but I hadn't really stayed up on what was going on in the libraries until I got on the board of the Friends Library and went to some meetings and saw what other libraries in South Carolina were doing. And I was just blown away because libraries have evolved. They're
They
no
have
longer just
evolved.
a place to go to get a book. They are where a lot of people have to go for access to the internet, broadband access. They have rooms where people can have meetings of all kinds. They can do continuing education. They have what they call maker spaces where people can go in there and make all kinds of things because they got the equipment and the materials. In some places, they go in there and make stuff they can they're going to apply for a U.S. patent on. They, um, they have all kinds of programming. They have sections for children. They have sections for teenagers. They have libraries where kids can go in and do video production. They can do audio production. They are just happening places, and they have programs that are for people that are all the way from toddlers all the way up to people who are my age, which is 80 or beyond. striking to me is that a lot of people are not aware of that. They think libraries are places to go to get books, and we don't need them anymore because you can always get your books on the internet. That's not true, but that you don't, what you find on the internet is not anywhere near what's available in a library, because the libraries have resources where even if they don't have the book in their stacks, they can get that book for you, or they can make it easy for you to get it online. Get magazine articles and music online, and libraries have the systems to allow you to do that for free. I mean, it is one of the last, maybe the last great democratic institution that everybody can have access to free. That's being paid for by taxes, but basically we don't charge people to use the library. And we don't know that. And in York County, it's especially bad because we've not built a new library in almost 25 years. The main library in Rock Hill is 40 years old. And it would, it's painful for me. It's embarrassing that other cities, Spartanburg, Greenville, Columbia, Charleston, Anderson, Greenwood, Florence, cities that are even smaller than Rock Hill, have modern libraries that put ours to shame. I'm not talking about the people who work in libraries. I'm talking about what they can do because we haven't funded their resources.
Correct.
It's easy to blame the board of trustees. It's easy to blame the county council because county council is responsible. But the current members of both those organizations, none of those people been on there for 25 years or 40 years. This is a long-term problem. And what makes it really shocking to me is that when you look at what's been invested in parks, athletic facilities, recreation facilities in this county, more than $500 million has been spent in the last 25 years, not primarily by the county government because they haven't had a real recreation department to speak of for any length of time. But I'm talking about city governments. I'm talking about
Mm-hmm.
nonprofits, church groups. Like Westminster Church has a wonderful park called Westminster Park that people can use for free or very little, depending on what the service is. So we have, and it's wonderful. We have all these facilities. We have walking trails everywhere. It's great. Emphasize, the healthy body, and we want to have that. But at the same time, we put virtually nothing into public libraries, building new public libraries, and it's shameful. And people they don't even think about it. Nobody's even talking about it. And this is what hurts me is because I was editor of the paper for 20 years, and I don't think I ever advocated for a modern library system because I wasn't aware of all these other things, wonderful things that were going on in other places.
Yeah.
So I
I
was very
I've
sorry.
had a glimpse into these types of, more modern libraries. My cousin works in one in Florida, and I mean the things that he will share with me that he can do in his facility. I'm just like going, if I had that, I would never be home. I would
Well,
be in
we
the library
freelance
creating and or, something doing other work
and
at the library.
people who come from other places to York County know that, but they aren't organized, and there's no place for them to go. The death of the news media being a factor. Well, the reason that there's a library at all in York County is because people in Rock Hill back in the 1800s, especially the editor, a guy named Hole at the time, advocated for a public library. And so, in years went on, they had one nice old library that they liked, and they wanted a brand new one. So they put the library on logs. They had mules pull this library. The building's still there. It's on Oakland Avenue.
Hmm.
They rolled it 2 blocks by mules and move it out of the way so they could build a brand new library, which is the library. I'll take that back. That was for the courthouse. Anyway, we moved the library and we have a new library, which is now 40 years old. But the point is that
That's the 1980s.
for a long time,
And that was still you went to the library to get books or maybe rent movies. That's it.
and now you can get all the movies, and free movies through the library system too. If you have a library card, You really great movies that are not on
Yeah.
commercial television. Anyway, the point is that if people want new libraries, are going to have to insist on it. The support's got to come from below. It's not going to come from above, and it's not going to be easy for a lot of political reasons that I don't want to get into.
Yeah. You are just a wealth of information and bringing a lot of this things to light about journalism and the library system. Um, you've been a steward to both of them. So, my last question to you, Terry, is what gives you hope for the next generation of truth seekers and storytellers?
Well, I just think that the instinct for storytelling is deeply ingrained in the human race, and that's how we got where we are. And every society has to define itself and use stories to emphasize those qualities that we value. And I think that there's a hunger for community. And we're going to read our next reading for the Salon at Rock Hill, which is a lifelong learning class that I help lead, is an article from Atlantic Magazine uh, about society. And it defines society as a series of concentric rings. First you have the family, and then you have the village, and then you have the tribe. And the tribe are those, everybody knows what family is, but the tribe are those things that you've causes or even athletic teams that you are loyal to, passionate about, that may have nothing to do with geography. In other words, you see somebody with a Carolina Panthers jersey on, you feel a kinship with them. They're part of your tribe. That's a very thin connection, but it gives you definition. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and you get into the politics, you have people that are right wing and left wing, and they belong to these tribes. But in the middle is the village. The village are those places where you live, the people you encounter on a regular basis. And your only connection to them may be that we live and work in the same place. But because of that, we see each other on a regular basis. We understand each other and we know each other, even though we might not be intimate friends. We might not only recognize each other by sight. But there's a quote in that article that says, the family teaches love, teaches you how to love. The tribe teaches you loyalty, but the village teaches you empathy. And I think empathy is what is missing from so much of what's going on in this country today. It's easy to hate somebody if you don't know them.
Yeah.
And it's hard to appreciate somebody if you don't know them, at least on some level, that you can understand their situation. All this stuff about how we have to get rid of DEI. Well, I understand where people say, well, we were becoming too woke. But when you look at what was trying to be accomplished by some of these initiatives, was that, give people of a different color, a different gender, a different sexual identity, give them a place at the table. Let them have an opportunity to get a good education, to get a good job, to afford a place to live, to raise their family. And that was the impulse behind all that. And I think that's the kind of thing that the village teaches you. And I think going back to what I said about newspapers, we were the village voice. I mean, that's what a lot of people learned and kept up on what was going on in the village. And unfortunately, that's been decimated, if not destroyed, to a large extent.
a very large extent. I do agree with that. We have been at this for a while, so we're going to land on that note. And do you have any other parting words, or do you have a way that people, if they had a question for you, do you have any like are you on
On
Facebook or
Facebook, is my name, Facebook. Yeah, I'm not gonna. I probably won't recognize people as friends because there's too many. I'm getting too many friends requests and people I know that have been dead for years. So I don't. I don't.
yeah,
I don't.
but
I don't respond to those. But yeah, I'm always. One of the things I ran into with newspapers the latter part of my career was that I stopped blogging because a very small number of people who just wanted to be jerks, that whatever you wrote or said, they wanted to blast you out of the
they
water.
want to be the troll to
Exactly. And
come out and get you.
you could say on one hand, well, they just want to be the gatekeeper, is what news media editors used to be portrayed as, the gatekeeper. Well, if you're going to have a civil conversation, somebody's going to have to be a gatekeeper. Somebody's going to decide, okay, this is newsworthy or a fair opinion, or this is just hateful hate speech. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're not going to allow it. And you've got to have a gatekeeper. And I think that at the national level, it's impossible. I mean, the days when Uncle Walter Cronkite would be where we would all turn to know what was going on, those days are gone forever.
Yeah.
But certainly at the local level, community level, there need to be responsible people who will say, no, this is fair commentary. This is not. This is hateful speech, and we're not going to allow it. Because I think what happens is so many people get just turned off. Isn't it?
Yeah. Um, I so agree. And uh, it's like I used to, I liked Facebook because of the connectability. So, I mean, I know it's not journalism, but it's that thing of it's supposed to be a place to build community. And I used to enjoy looking at Facebook, but all of it's changed so much because I could keep up with people that I grew up with, or I don't live really close to family, so I could keep up with family members. Now, if we want to keep up with each other, we go to private messaging because we don't want anybody interfering with our conversations because of the trolls.
Yeah.
But yes, there's a lot of things, and the trustworthiness of what's out there is at an all-time low or an all-time high. People do not trust a lot of what they read anymore.
Agree.
So, well, Mr. Terry, it has been a pleasure to learn more about you and your career in the journalism um, platform field. You had quite the career there, and I appreciate some of your colorful stories you shared today. I hope that maybe we can do this again sometime.
Oh, I'm sure. But maybe I'll let you talk instead of me talking so much.
So, everybody, this is another edition of Life Mosaic. And if you would like to find us, we're always here at lifemosaic.me. You can follow me on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at LLW Weezy is my social handles, and you can always find me over on my website. If you have questions for Terry, you can go over to the show notes and ask in the comment section on our website, lifemosaic.me. Have a great week, everybody. Bye.